I was studying computer science at Chico in California. And then like a GE class, I took sculpture and I started to love it. And so I was wondering how I could blend the real world with also the digital world.
That is Joe Andolina, Director of Technical Marketing here at Salesforce. I'm Josh Burke, your host for the Salesforce Developer Podcast. And here on the podcast, you'll hear stories and insights from developers for developers. Today, we sit down and talk with Joe about his long history of doing some pretty crazy experiments with IoT and how some of that has delved back into Work.com and the pandemic. There, Joe was describing how he created his own degree in visual computer science. And to kick things off, we're going to start back there.
And side note is I took 3 semesters of trampoline, getting trained by this person who taught NASA astronauts how to navigate 3D space.
No way.
So I took all that subject material and wrote my own major. So I took all sorts of 3D graphics courses and graduate courses as a undergrad, and then bounced on the trampoline and visualized it in the computer. And then I made interactive sculptures. It was super fun.
Wow. That is pretty cool stuff. So before then, what was like your earliest experiences with computers?
This is a funny one.
Okay.
Macy's back in the day was very community active. And so they had a build a robot competition. And so I took a few cardboard boxes and stacked them up. And I've always loved to take things apart. And so I took some radio parts and glued them on the inside of the head.
No
So it had
way.
a door on the side you could see inside. And I won an Atari 400.
My God. That is totally awesome. I mean, Atari 400, that's like gold for a kid.
So what you would do is, well, it's not the 1200.
Right.
So you'd have to play a tape into it. And then you'd have to copy pages of code into it. And then it would play like guess 1 to 100. So that's my earliest programming.
Nice. And I do like the fact, and when you say tape, that's a proper cassette tape, right?
Yeah, it was just after the 8-track.
Nice. Okay, you also spent 11 years at Adobe. What was your job like back then?
That was pretty cool too. They just came out, Macromedia just came out with Flex, which was server-side ActionScript, which is basically server-side Flash. And so I got brought in to do that as a consulting role. And my first job there was to make Yahoo Maps as a single-page interactive thing, right as Google Maps was coming out. And so we did that. That was fun. And so that was the consulting team. Then the consulting team kind of got dissolved, or it just wasn't doing Flex anymore. That got end of life.
Yeah.
And so then I was one of the few developers in the design department, and they would come to us and say, "Is this possible?" And we're like, "Yeah, that's possible." And we do proof of concepts. And then several of our products got shipped. Specifically, the last one of the ones I worked on was Adobe Shape. And it would use the camera to real-time catch vector images. And it turned out to just be a logo stealer.
Nice. Okay, so I have to ask a side question there. So I don't know if we've had this conversation before around Flex, because Flex was also how I got into the Salesforce ecosystem, because they needed somebody who could develop rich interactive applications, which was sort of all the rage back then.
Nice.
And the guy who got me into Flex was James Ward over at Adobe. Were you compatriots with James?
I do know James Ward. He and I, we did collaborate on one project together. I cannot tell you what it was right now. But I started out as just like, "Hey, Jay," like he was an evangelist, I believe, at the time.
Yeah.
And so you'd always see his work. And then I'm like, well, I need to know that. So I started emailing him, and then we became buddies. And yeah, then he was at Salesforce for a good time, but I don't think he's there anymore.
I believe he's over at Google now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good guy.
Good guy. And I still like to, tease him about just how far Flex actually made it.
Yeah. I mean, it was amazing to be able to code something instead of use the GUI, kind of like what SFDX does at Salesforce.
Well, yeah, and it was nicely componentized. And I think, all jabs aside, at the time, there wasn't much of a competitor to Flex. I remember Microsoft came out with Silverlight and some other stuff like that. But at the time, if you really wanted to create a complicated user interface and you didn't want to code it in like Macromedia Flash, like Flex was kind of the go-to.
Yeah, it was pretty cutting edge. And like that was before we had web apps and Node and all that stuff.
Right. Okay, then how did you come to work at Salesforce?
So a lot of my friends work at Salesforce, and I think it might be a marketing thing, but I'm not a sales guy. So I saw the name and decided that's not for me. And then I found out what they do. And so specifically, I know Robin Guido, and she and I worked together on the consulting team back at Macromedia.
Got it.
And so there's a offsite that Parker does every year called the Innovation Summit. And so they need a fun element. And so before I worked at Salesforce, Robin brought me in to do a tinkering event with a man called Gaber Tully, who runs a cool school in San Francisco. And so we put together this thing where you got a box of popsicle sticks and tape and glue. And your challenge was to get a ball to roll exactly, build a contraption that would have a pinball, like a steel ball bearing, roll for exactly 2 seconds. And so we had a cup at the bottom with wires sticking out of it. And then we had a solenoid to launch it at the top so you could get good timing. So everyone built their machines. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. And then what we did was they left for the night. And when they came back the next day, we had taken and made a waterfall out of all the working machines because the wires coming out weren't for the timer. They were actually to trigger the next machine. Nice. So that was my first like real Salesforce project. And then I got to do that project for the Innovation Summit 2 more times.
Got it.
As an employee, which was super fun.
That's so Jets. Like now I'm having flashbacks to like trying to drop an egg off of the ceiling and not have it break kind of thing. Yeah,
like, so we talk about, should we do an egg drop? Should we get a hot air balloon? Like, yeah, all the things.
Nice. Well, so then that kind of segues into my next question in that you've got like a history of both software and hardware. So how did you start getting interested in the hardware side of things?
Well, that takes us back to college because in sculpture, this Neil Grimmer, I believe he was at IDEO for a while. He would drive to Chico several days a week and teach art in technology courses because he was a sculptor at the time. And he introduced me to the basic stamp. And so that you write basic into, but you could control the pins and turn stuff on and off and deal with sensors. So from that class, I started loving microcontrollers and just learning hardware on my own. And so you get the theme here. I've always made weird things.
Right.
And so, but hardware with microcontrollers wasn't paying the bills, whereas software development did. So I doubled down on software development, but anytime there was a chance to interact with the real world through microcontrollers and Wiimotes or Kinects or whatever, I was always super into it.
Got it.
And so finally, I've blended all that and made that my job.
Nice. And then on your LinkedIn, I noted that you have a bit where you built a swarm of wireless devices that used mesh networking for audience interactivity. And I have to know everything about that.
Okay. So let's go back to the Innovation Summit. So what happened was we made our own cloud boards. They're shaped like clouds and they're internet connected, Bluetooth enabled. They have little LCD screens on them. And so what the prompt that year was everybody their teams had to make a percussive instrument because they each got a single note off of a xylophone that had a microphone in it. And then they had a ball, like this was with wooden balls, and they'd have to drop. There was a ball dropper mechanism that they got, but between the ball and the note, they had to build the whole machine. And so what happened was they'd make a machine by pushing a button that would drop the balls onto the note. And behind the scenes, the microcontroller is actually timing the release to the impact because every single machine would have a different offset. And once people got far enough, there was a mobile app and they could control their machine with this mobile app and do patterns into it. And so shaving a haircut was kind of a halfway through the challenge.
Nice.
And then at the very end of this project, what happened, or the big reveal, was we had the audience pressing their buttons, try to follow a line along and play a song. Like when you saw the yellow note, you'd press your button and it sounded like crap on purpose. But then I told everyone to load up their machines and we're going to try again, close your eyes. And with their eyes closed, we started and played the machines with all their offsets from our server. And it played the Brandenburg Concerto on this 100 devices. And we called the project Distributed Symphony.
Nice. Oh my God.
It was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. That is pretty cool. Okay. So now today I want to focus on some of the demos you've been working on related to Work.com and the pandemic. And starting with fever testing, can you describe some of the hardware that's out there that you can use to set up something like a simple fever testing kiosk?
Yeah. So once the pandemic came, everyone was like, what are we going to do? And so very quickly it became apparent that we're going to need to be able to deal with fevers. And Salesforce released Work.com, but Salesforce as a policy is not automating Work.com. But a lot of the customer ask was for automated solutions. So we started going down the road of the art of the possible. What does automated Work.com look like? And so FLIR, the company, makes a $500 camera that clicks on an iPhone. And so that camera isn't FDA approved for human scanning because the error is so large.
Got it.
It has like a 4-degree error, and that's exactly what a fever is.
Right.
But that was the camera I used for all the demos that I was doing. And it was enough to show that, yes, it's possible.
Right.
And so from there, I found that Seek, it's thermal.com. They make a scanning kiosk. I believe their API is Windows only. And then there's a whole slew of other companies that are now making integratable standalone kiosks for thermal scanning. So if you want to play with thermal cameras, FLIR is a great solution for low end, but not necessarily human scanning. I think their next product that's FDA approved is like $10,000. But the Seek one I mentioned is only $1,500.
Got it. So if you want to prototype but not necessarily use it in production, that's a lot more reasonable.
Right.
And then what's it like on the iPad to communicate with that?
So there's an Apple API from FLIR. And so that's pretty super easy. But what happened was, as we went down the road of all these COVID related things, we decided that you're not allowed to touch anything.
Oh, right.
And so a side effect of that was we got the new iPad that has the LiDAR, so you can do motion tracking.
Oh.
And that new iPad added motion tracking, but it got rid of the lightning port. So the camera didn't work anymore.
No way.
Yeah. So in the demo video, there's an iPhone running the thermal scanning, and then the iPad had to be Bluetooth to the phone to ask it what temperature it was seeing. So that is how the communication worked.
Got it.
The rabbit hole goes deep.
Right, exactly. I could almost hear your eyes light up when you said the word LiDAR, though, because that's pretty cool technology, right?
Yeah, and also I was looking for the word. I was happy to find it, and I'm excited about it.
Nice. Totally side question. How easy is it to fake a fever for demo purposes?
I have these little heat packs, and you boil them in water, and they're really cool. You click a button, and it crystallizes.
Nice.
And you hold it on your face like for 5 seconds, and that gets you over the 4 degrees we talked about.
Gotcha.
You're good to go.
Nice. Okay, when I first started working with Salesforce and IoT, the solutions were really pretty heavy on the programmatic side. Like if I wanted to talk to Salesforce, I would wrap together some combination of REST APIs and triggers, maybe a custom REST API. And then if I wanted the device to react to something, it was like an HTTP call out or maybe a streaming API push. Walk me through now what it's like to do something like create a case based on that temperature going up on the iPad.
Well, everything you just said is still true.
Okay.
But yeah, so what we do is depending on which device needs to talk to Salesforce, you can OAuth straight into a connected app. And then triggering flows is how we do it. So you build a flow and pass it several arguments like user ID, temperature, whatever data you need for your given use case. But then within Flow Builder, it's just create a case. So you just hit that node in your flow and you're good to go.
Well, yeah. So that's an interesting part, I think, because it was always like a decision was like, where does the business process live? Like, it shouldn't live on the device, right? Like the device is just that all its job is to say the temperature is 94, the temperature is 96, the temperature is 98, right? And then,
or even just anomalies.
Right. Like everything's fine. No, Joe has a fever. It's 102.
Right.
And then my business logic was usually wrapped somewhere else, but it sounds like we can put a lot of that logic into flows now.
You can. And then, like I said, it depends who's talking to Salesforce, because another solution that we use a lot is to have a Heroku server with an endpoint, because some of the microcontrollers don't have the memory to negotiate the HTTPS connection and do the OAuth. And so in those cases, we'll hit Heroku endpoints and throw the business logic on the Heroku side before it gets to a flow. And then that'll simplify the flow.
Got it.
But you're spot on with do all the processing as far away as you can, unless it has to do with business logic, and then move it in.
Right. Well, and I always found that the events of having platform events and things like that also made coding that stuff so much easier, because you can basically just send the message over the wire, kind of like how the device is supposed to be designed.
Yeah, pretty much. And now I just noticed that there's a new flow type, and it's platform event triggered flow.
Nice. So you can even remove a little bit more Apex there.
Yep. Or there's zero Apex.
Well, and that was going to be my final question, was how streamlined are we getting to this, where we're almost getting to, I don't want to say no code, because I actually literally just had a conversation about how flow is more like visual code, but not necessarily the programmatic code that we're thinking of.
Right. I've been working since March, so I don't know how long is it, 8 months? Yeah. And there's been not one line of Salesforce code.
Nice.
For these things.
Got it.
Only I need to do some JSON processing, and so that's today. And so that's the first time I've done any Apex coding in 8 months.
And so that's let's unpack that a little bit. No joke intended. So the flow is doing most of the work, but Apex is going to be doing this very specialized job of decoding that JSON for you.
Yeah. The flow has a way to get out. You do an action, and if you have what is the word? It's like I can click on my developer console. Hold on real quick. Okay. If you have an invocable method on your Apex call, then that'll show up in your flow as an action. And so you just call it right there.
Nice.
So the integration is pretty tight, although my current one isn't working yet.
Got it. Okay, so going to a different use case, what is Densityio and how can it help with tracking occupancy?
Densityio is, let me take a step back. Okay. We've been working with all sorts of hardware manufacturers, and there's crazy devices out there. It's pretty exciting. They have a camera that can take everybody's temperature in a whole room all at once.
Really?
Yeah, there's some really cool stuff out there. And so Densityio is another one of those cool objects, or cool developers. And it's a human sensor that goes over doorways, ideally. And it tracks flow in and out of a room anonymously. So if people had Bluetooth badges, you could add a badge scanner to it to see who's going in and out. But our use case was for restroom occupancy, to see if they were too crowded. You don't want to be in small spaces. And so it's just anonymously letting you know if a bathroom's full or crowded.
So is it detecting like velocity then? It knows somebody's going in versus somebody's coming out?
I think it does. It's directional, and it's just like blob detection, basically. Very low-level computer vision.
Got it. Oh.
Not low-level, but very simple.
But low fidelity, because it doesn't care what it looks like. It just cares where it's going.
Right.
Got it. And talk to me a little bit about the Salesforce side of the setup of that demo. Like, how did you structure the data in order to be able to track that occupancy?
So a lot of what we've been doing is integrating cloud to cloud, not the devices, because a lot of the developers have their own clouds gathering up all this data. And so my favorite so far has been Sense Agent. They're a Australian company, and they have these devices. There's 4 of them in my over my head right now. But they do light, noise level, volatile chemicals, CO2, all this stuff. In addition, they also have Bluetooth capabilities. And so it can track real-time people's proximity to one another, and who's in the room and where they're standing. It does really cool stuff. But all we had to do for them, and the same with Densityio, is just write an integration to their cloud into our stuff, and then make custom objects for the portions of the data that we're interested in.
Oh, okay. And
sometimes that's just another Heroku endpoint that they call periodically or when certain thresholds are met.
Got it. So once again, very kind of low level and just having APIs talking to each other to make sure important data is getting to the right place.
Right.
Nice. Now, in that demo, you're using your customized microcontrollers there, right?
Right. Those are the leftovers from that distributed Symphony project.
Oh, nice. And then you have that device reacting to the state of things in Salesforce. And so that's the opposite route of what we've been kind of talking about. So by the way, this is like one of my favorite IoT tricks. And I'm it's like seeing Doug Sparky's arm move just because, some opportunity changed, that's like black magic for some people who haven't seen that kind of reaction before. Right. And so how is that device getting that near real-time response to something that's happening in the cloud?
Yeah, I am there with you. Using Salesforce to control objects outside in the real world is magical because Salesforce was built to consume data. Mm-hmm. It's very rarely outputting the data. So what these devices are doing is calling flows directly. Mm. And so if you use a platform event, you can call a flow, and that's fine. But if you call a flow directly, then you can get a response from it. Mm. And so with the flow, the device says, I'm this room at this location. What's my occupancy? And then it sends back what the occupancy is, what color the light should be, and what image to display on your screen.
Gotcha.
And so, like we said earlier, all that business logic is on the server side. This thing's dumb. It's like, there's this many people, turn my light this color. Like, it doesn't even have to change its light color based on the number it gets because all that business logic is handled in the flow.
Which is going back to that design principle of IoT likes to send only the data it wants and only the data it needs, kind of thing. So you're sending that message as short and simple as possible.
Yeah, no noise.
No noise. That's a good way to put it. And are there other tricks about tracking proximity with, I guess, is there specific things with Bluetooth and hardware to know you're that employee and you're walking up to that desk? Yeah.
So a lot of the kiosks we've built using the iPad, they use just regular Bluetooth, which has general bands of I see this many devices. They're near, far, or immediate. Mm-hmm. And so that's really cool. And you have those IDs. So if it's somebody's badge, and that's another thing, HID Global and a bunch of other companies are now building employee badges that have Bluetooth signatures. Mm-hmm. And so if your building's instrumented correctly, you'll know where everybody is within, or at least the last sensor they went by. If you have enough sensors, like the Sense Agent stuff, where you build a grid, you'll know exactly where people are at all times. Mm-hmm. Got sidetracked on the question there.
No,
that was winding up for the answer and I missed it.
No, that's kind of where I was going with. I was just kind of curious as to some of the specifics of how that hardware, goes one step beyond and says you're this employee and you're in this location, kind of thing. Right. And so that's another place where Salesforce shines, is because you've given out these badges that have anonymous IDs, right? Mm-hmm. And only when you come back, when you take that ID, you can tie it to a user record securely inside of Salesforce. Mm-hmm. So then it knows what door and where you were at. It's just basically Bluetooth advertising data. Gotcha.
And so your phone is always trying to connect to networks and saying, hey, I'm this person, or hey, I want to connect all the devices around me. And so even without those badges, you can do anonymous tracking of devices just by listening, which is pretty cool.
Nice.
And Bluetooth is only accurate to about 3 to 6 feet. And then there's NRF, which you can get accuracy down to the inch, which is pretty cool.
Oh, wow. Nice.
So if you get a different flavor of radio frequency, then you get your different resolution. Because like you can even use Wi-Fi for triangulation, but it's not super accurate.
Right. Now walk me through, like, let's take the scenario on the Salesforce side of things. So like the demo where somebody's at a workstation and somebody gets too close. What's the back and forth on the Salesforce side to kind of like track that data and then end up in a resolution that might require a case?
So if in the scenario where somebody's at a workstation, that workstation's considered like occupied, and then somebody else comes and crowds the workstation for a given amount of time, that'll put it into like an alert state. So you'll have records for who's there. You'll know who was there first and who did the crowding. And then you'll also know their durations of how long they were at the workstation just by their Bluetooth badges and then the occasional polling. But then, again, just to sound like a broken record, we just throw it into a flow.
Right.
And if your conditions are met that there's more than X number of people at this station for this amount of time, schedule a support ticket to have the station cleaned, and also schedule a case to go do follow-up with those people and make sure they're not contaminated and stuff.
Got it.
But all that comes down to business use cases for the customer, right? Like if they are okay with people hanging out until somebody has a fever, then they'll use that data to figure, they might incorporate that data into contact tracing or something.
Yeah. And I guess we keep coming back to this. Your architecture can remain 90% the same, and all that's doing is sending the messages that are important across the wire. And then the complicated stuff, the business logic, that can be handled in Flow, and that can be customized down to specifically what somebody actually needs.
Right. Because like if employees start working in employee pods, or say they're family members, you're going to have to be able to have exceptions where, yeah, those people crowded, but they're okay to crowd.
Right. That's the work team that's actually assigned to do that. Gotcha. Okay, we promised we were going to give Charlie Isaacs a shout out here since he was involved in some of these. How's Charlie doing these days?
Charlie's doing great, and I can't thank him enough for this stuff. And if we could just rewind the conversation back to the first IoT with the marbles.
Yeah.
Charlie was part of that.
Nice.
Charlie has brought me in for all these demos working with outside clients to show them the art of the possible.
Got it.
So he is the IoT master.
He is very centered to the IoT world of Salesforce. And once again, I love the fact that even though I'm basically stuck at home all the time, I keep running into Charlie.
It's like your stalker.
I know. Even in a virtual world, Charlie Isaacs is probably there.
And I believe, Josh, that you and I know you because of Charlie.
Right. Yes, exactly. And he has been this, like, he's kind of like the Kevin Bacon of the IoT world in Salesforce, I feel like. Okay, so I know you've done a lot of cool stuff, both in and outside of the Salesforce ecosystem. And so what would you consider to be one of your neatest projects, either Salesforce or not Salesforce related?
Oh, man.
Ooh, and,
okay.
You can take two if it's hard to pick.
I'd like to say
favorite of your children.
Building custom hardware for that distributed symphony. Like I've never built a circuit board before, so that was for like a heavy duty circuit board with surface mount devices. So that was the coolest Salesforce thing I've done.
Gotcha.
And then we're finishing up a 3-year camper conversion from a cargo van. And so it was absolutely blank when we got it. And now it's got hardwood floors. It has a winch to pull motorcycles in it, unfolding bed. It's got ground effects. Yeah. So that's pretty awesome. Because, yeah, and the electrical system that went in there is crazy because, why not?
Ground effects, like LED lighting on the undercarriage?
Yeah. So my friends are into rock crawling. And so if you ever get caught out rock crawling at night, they make these kits where it lights your wheel wells so you can see where you're going.
No way.
And so then when I was buying it, and then also another thing is if you get to a campsite and you just turn those on, it kind of lights the ground so you can set up faster.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh yeah, I'll get those. And I'm like, wait, they make green ones. Oh, they make blue ones. And then I'm like, why not RGB? And I think now it's just a cool factor. Oh, maybe not even cool, but it's just more fun to make the van exciting.
Nice. Now, for the people out there who are not Joe and are not creating their own custom microcontrollers and IoT hardware, do you have, and I'm actually kind of asking this for myself because I've been out of the loop for a little bit, is there IoT hardware that you kind of recommend people pick up if they just kind of wanted to try some of this IoT architecture that we're talking about?
So, I mean, there's all sorts of just like IoT lights and things like that you can get off Amazon. And then the easiest way to get into IoT is get something that then ties into if this, then that.
Yes. Nice.
So if you just find any device you want that's if this, then that compatible, you should be good to go.
Which I should note, just to kind of bring it full circle, there is a Salesforce if this, then that, which was generated by our mutual friend, James Ward.
Whoa. And so you could extend that to do all the work we've been doing. Maybe I should just have been doing that instead.
Okay, now I think this question is actually potentially going to be a little difficult because you have so many technical hobbies, but what is your favorite non-technical hobby?
It's either skiing or dirt biking.
Nice.
I love adrenaline, and sitting behind a desk is not that exciting.
Well, it doesn't surprise me because you also have a pretty impressive hardware shop at home, right?
I do. So back to college, that sculpture class ruined me because I had access to TIG welders, MIG welders, a wood shop, a metal shop. And that's also when I learned how to weld.
Nice.
And so at home, because I'm a nerd, there's a 4-axis CNC mill, laser cutter, metal lathe, and then it's pretty outfitted as a metal/machine shop.
Nice.
We don't have room to put the wood in, but a wood shop would be great too.
And that's our show. I want to thank Joe for the great conversation and information. And as always, I want to thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about Joe's inventions and demos, head on over to developer.salesforce.com/podcast, where you can see the show notes, hear old episodes, and have links to your favorite podcast service. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next week.